Known as the 1972 Burundians, a group of primarily Hutu refugees fled Burundi in 1972 after a campaign of violence by the country's then Tutsi-dominated government. Over 200,000 people were killed, with hundreds of thousands escaping to neighboring countries, including Tanzania. Despite having one of the world's largest refugee communities, earlier this month the Tanzanian government granted citizenship to 162,000 of these Burundian refugees. The UN has described it as a historic decision because it is so rare. Africa Today asks, will the decision be a source of inspiration and perhaps a model for other African countries with refugee communities?
Tanzania became the biggest recipient of refugees on the African continent by year 2000 when an estimated 680,000 people fled their home countries of Burundi and DR Congo. The influx of refugees started when some hundreds of thousands escaped in 1972 from Burundi's ethnic violence that left about 200,000 people dead. The refugees, many of them Hutus, were later joined by hundreds of thousands more of Congolese refugees and other Burundians who fled the civil war in the 1990s. Tanzania's government has given citizenship to some 162,000 Burundian refugees.
This is an historic moment. I think that we need to express to the government and the people of Tanzania our deep gratitude and appreciation for this very generous act. More than 160,000 Burundian refugees that fled their country in 72, more than 30 years ago, will receive the nationality of Tanzania. That is a great moment. That's the best possible solution for these people. We are extremely happy with that.
This is something which I believe they should remember for the rest of their lives, because effectively they have opened the door. They're the first to actually be given their certificates as part and parcel of this exercise which we've been doing together.
Africa Today looks at the impact this might have on the country's social and economic life.
Hello and welcome to Africa Today with me, Vuyiswa. The International Organization for Migration estimates 3% of the world's population, that's some 192 million people, now live outside the country of their birth. Of course, finding effective and dignified ways of addressing refugee problems is a challenge for the whole world, not just the African continent. And here with me to discuss what the impact of the Tanzanian government's initiative will be on refugee policies in Africa are Femi Okutubo, the editor-in-chief of the Trumpet newspaper, Dennis Katungi, a spokesperson for the National Resistance Movement UK. And from Dar es Salaam, we're welcoming Eveline Wolfcarius, the External Relations Officer for the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
If I could start with you, Eveline. Hopefully you can hear us loud and clear from Tanzania. Could you answer the question, about what exactly this decision means? Because initial reports are that the citizenship status that is being praised is actually dependent upon the refugees being relocated to other parts of Tanzania. And only then, when they are moved, will they get their naturalization certificates. So what is the exact situation? Are you celebrating too early?
Right. As you know, we have started this naturalization process together with the Tanzanian government in early 2008. It has been a thorough process. Refugees have applied at refugee settlement level, and their naturalization applications have gone through district, regional, and central review before the Minister for Home Affairs, Honorable Lawrence Masha, signed off the list for naturalizations early this year. Now, this is the legal act of naturalization. Only 2 weeks ago, the public announcement was made in one of the 3 refugee settlements, Katumba, in western Tanzania, that the Tanzanian government has granted naturalization to 162,000 of the applicants. The naturalization notifications have, at that moment, been posted in the 3 settlements. Both naturalized and rejected applicants have been identified, and this is where we are now. So we are basically in the last phase of the naturalization.
Right.
As you said correctly, the naturalization certificates have not been handed out yet.
Okay, okay. Well, from what you've just heard there, Femi, do you feel as exultant about this decision? Because it's very laudable what the Tanzanian government has done. I don't think anybody would be arguing against that. But do you think, practically speaking, there is something to celebrate within that? Because we're talking about people who've lived in Tanzania for 38 years already anyway.
The reality here is that I think it's definitely a laudable thing to happen. And again, if you look at the antecedents of Tanzania as far as refugees are concerned, you'd notice that Tanzania is probably the African country with the most in terms of refugees, in their country. Yeah. And the fact that they've now taken this step to sort of grant naturalization, as it were, mm-hmm. to these over 160,000 people is definitely a very good step. Mm-hmm. Now, I believe that that journey has started, and obviously there are lessons that need to be learned from what might have happened in a place like Rwanda, yeah. where, when that decision was made, it still took a bit of time for it to be actually implemented. Well,
a bit of time is 10 years. That's quite more than a bit of time.
I agree with you. Yeah. But, the reality is, I think things seem to be moving a little bit faster than they seem to have moved in Rwanda. And mm-hmm. definitely one hopes that in a matter of, probably a few months' time, yes. hopefully everything should have been put in place. You're talking about people who've lived for, almost 40 years, a good part of their life in that part of the country. So I think, it's only a natural thing to do mm-hmm. to actually allow people to settle that, because, they've probably known no other country in the best part of their life.
I would assume a fair number of them, Dennis, were born there and identify very much, at least geographically, with Tanzania. I mean, being part of the Great Lakes region, you're from Uganda.
Yes.
The situation, I mean, does the situation inspire you in terms of a kind of ripple effect it may have on other African countries, like your own government, for instance, in how it deals with refugees or potential refugees?
The first thing to say is that when people have lived away from their own country for as long as those have, I think it's only natural that, where they live now is home.
Yeah.
And to me, the big question, apart from commending the government of Tanzania for this gesture, is for how long can people be refugees, be termed that tag refugees? Because naturally, you would expect that when you're talking about a span of 40 years, most of those would have been born in Tanzania. So they are Tanzanians by birth. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So naturalization normally refers to people who have moved from somewhere else, but a big proportion of those would have been born there. Right. So for me, it brings into mind some questions like those populations that, especially with our borders in Africa, in that area, you find that they are the same people. We have a big population of Sudanese at the moment in Uganda.
Yes.
We have a big population of Rwandese in Uganda, and these come back from the 60s. Mm-hmm. So to me, when I think of the generation of Rwandese who went back to Rwanda, including the president of Rwanda now, Kagame, where in Uganda they came as babies and they went back into their country when they were in their 40s. Mm-hmm. But they had become Ugandans by naturalization. So to me, it brings into question what period should people live into neighboring countries for them to be naturalized. I think it should be shorter than this period.